Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be rather than leave it in the comment, a response to Geek37 who just, happy 2019, so it's the first of the first 2019 here, and he posted this video about township squares, township grids and the magic sun square. Link to this video will be in the description. Also his channel does a lot of very cool stuff with math and geometry, but this is also a screenshot from his this particular video where he's talking about the grid system, not just in townships but also to divide up the map across the US. And for that we need to really begin, goes back to George Washington, famous conscientious Mason, let's call it, very interested in the craft, also very interested in town planning geometry of course, but also survey and nation planning. And this has a very similar theme here in Australia to Governor Lachlan Macquarie, who was so vital, instrumental in setting up the foundation of the social elements here in Australia, but also the town plans, street width, this type of thing. Also even the more tame biographies of him describe him as a conscientious Freemason, not just a practitioner of a craft, and so he was instrumental in setting up the colony, but survey roads, distances, but also founding townships. And one of the towns he founded was Bathurst here in New South Wales, Australia. Macquarie River, but very, very influential characters. So both George Washington in America, Lachlan Macquarie here in Australia, and this Freemasonic aspect. Now, Freemasons talk about their ancient origins back to ancient stonemasons. So the collegia in ancient Rome or Greece, and where these masons, architects learnt their craft, of course, the famous stonework of Egypt and elsewhere, they often talk about their origins in there, and through the geometry, proportions, and just the similar interest in architecture and survey. We see now if it's a direct link, who can say, but definitely carrying on with these ancient systems, measures of principles of geometry, measurement, and architecture, of course, stonemasons, and the earlier craft guilds. So before modern masons, you had the stone guilds, so stonemasons, that's some of the origins there, but strong links between Australia and America, also Canada or New Zealand, you'll find similar as well. Now I'm also going to link a fantastic interview by Halfasheep channel, where he interviews this architect from Bathurst, Henry Bialowas, and he's interesting as well because back in his early days at RMIT University, he wrote a thesis, Architecture of the Dark Side, as in dark as in hidden, not dark as in evil, but hidden so very similar to the word occult, and means sort of hidden. But he was an investigation into sacred geometry, looking at things like the golden ratio, ancient architectural philosophy, and even describes rather diplomatically that his thesis was not well received at the time. Sacred geometry, these types of things, have become a little bit more acceptable in recent years because of the devoted study of many people and the ancient sites, as well as more modern sites, what's measurable, testable. It's there to be measured and examined, and you can see, it just follows on. So it's I just had a recent discussion last few days of even an architecture and landscape architecture student who never heard of these things. So amongst the establishment teaching, these are still very taboo, if not openly discussed. But it's a very interesting topic. You can trace it, you can measure it. So it's interesting because in the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, 10 books of architecture, he describes machines, but also principles of town planning, temple planning, and this book and others is so influential. Even Palladio in the Renaissance wrote on this. These are very influential textbooks, and what's curious that amongst those who teach this, that this is not even mentioned, let alone even a brief subject to be discussed, but it is recorded in the greats of architecture going back thousands of years, even where texts, such as with ancient Egypt and other places where the texts don't exist, we can measure the temples, we can measure the town plans. It's all there, it's all repeated. But the principle where Geek 37 was talking about the concept of township planning, the grids, and connections to the sun. And we can look. So Freemasons draw on these ancient design principles. We can see them in Roman times. In this interview with Henry Bialowas, he discusses these elements, and we can connect it to ancient Roman survey and town planning. So we have this the templum of the sky as an element, a basic element. So we're connecting astronomy and alignment, just like Shastra and stretching the cord. This is a design principle which is carried through astronomical, literal astronomy alignment, as well as more symbolic elements. And we see the town square a little bit, but okay, you can. That's the templum of the sky with this. Let's just simplify it: north, south, east, west axis, which is so often slightly off true north, but that's a whole other thing, very astronomical. But this comparing it to the town map in Bathurst, where in this link in the description where he talks about the design elements in there. Well, these principles we can actually trace back much further to the Vastu Shastra, this very, very ancient architecture, very similar in essence to feng shui, but it's we can still find it in even modern city design, and it's continuing through where we have a esoteric as well as exoteric elements. And you can see this Vastu Shastra where we have the 9 square plan. So Vastu Shastra will be a 9 square, 4 square, 5 square, or 6 square. Geek 37 talks about the 6 square design, and also the magic squares connected in there. I could do a bit, so if you look at Kershaw, or his name, Albrecht Dürer, and how magic squares are so often included in these esoteric diagrams and texts as well. But what do we have there at the center? We have the sun. And so New Haven, Connecticut, home of Yale University, Harkness Tower, 216 feet high. You could have covered it earlier. These places are overloaded with this imagery. And this goes back to the late 1600s, this map. So this is New Haven. And notice the church there in the middle of this 9 square town plan. Yale University, famous for Skull and Bones, other secrets, Lock and Key, and other secret societies. Not so secret because, well, they're well known. But now if you can compare it to the Bathurst plan, and we see at the heart of the Bathurst plan is a 9 square town plan, and again, church marked in the middle. Now, what's similarities between here? Well, as we find, as Henry Bialowas pointed out about Bathurst, the central square has no number, it has no boundary, it's a simply named square, and at the middle we have a church. He's talking about the geometric and the spiral plan, which emerges from the greater Bathurst plan, but as the omega point. And then it occurred to me back then, I've covered this in some early videos, but never as a separate, just one similar to this. Well, we see that same in New Haven, where the central square has the church in the middle, and the boundaries are not as well defined in there. Now, you do have that, I must point out, but the boundary, once again, is not as clearly defined. There's no boundary, no name, no number, and it's the omega point of the town plan. Now, going on to Yale University and all the other architecture society connections in there, you get an idea of this similarity. But this actually goes back to the not just Roman text, but also the Vastu Shastra and these ancient, very ancient, some which suggest it's 6,000 years old, the Vastu Shastra. Of course, documents don't tend to survive that well, but we see the elements in temple design going back. Okay, I'll put a link in the description to the playlist. I did a whole series on Borobudur in Indonesia, and so both Hindu and Buddhist temples follow this same plan. So we see the mandala. That's the aerial view, and that's the mandala plan. And you'll also find it in Prambanam and so many other Hindu and Buddhist temples with this essentially a 9 square plan, or a 4x4 or 5x5, 6x6, up to 8x8. Here's another example of a mandala, and we see in the center, even though they've got the circle, but we have a 9 square plan hinting at the sun there in the center, and connection to the Roman or so many other ancient societies using these same principles and the connection. So whether it's Hindu or Roman, we know sun worship being so important, or a connection joining many of them. It's another example of a Vastu Shastra. You can see like there's a 1 square, 2 square, 3 square, so 3 by 2 with your central, the blue square marking out the ninth or the center square, the omega point. And so again, similar themes. And there's another example of what this, so we see the visual image, but that's what it's the sun, and we see Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, as well as the the ascending moon. And there are two, the ascending, so Saturn, we also have the ascending and descending moon, or possibly the other way around. We have 2 moon squares, but the sun square being at the center of this lunar ascending, lunar descending. There's so you have the 7 heavenly bodies, but then we have we have a moon one there as well. So actually we have 3 moons, and the descending and the ascending plan. And even the Borobudur has 9 levels in total, all the nice geometry and math and connections which can be drawn from these very interesting set of numbers that are specifically chosen. And so there we see how these principles, whether it was directly from the Vastu Shastra or incorporated from Rome, doesn't really matter what the origin inspiration was, because we find it across time, across the world, across cultures. And that's an example of at least in townships, how this symbolic element goes. Now, if you watch the Henry Bialowas interview in full, link in description, really worth a watch. But he also points out the connection between, let's just call it, I'm not comfortable. I don't think we should separate the exoteric and esoteric in a strict sense, that they're actually linked. But as he points out, there is a spiritual element here. So where you have the church, the omega point, you could say the God square in a way, but also how it is a market square. And the theme that I really repeat often in my videos is the connection between weights and measure systems, and how this connects with navigation and with commerce and so many other important elements which have a direct spiritual link. So navigation as in a physical navigation, but also in religious principles, who am I, where did I come from, where am I going? A very strong overlap between these two. So we have a market square, commerce, but we also have a spiritual element in there as well, an esoteric and an exoteric connection. The street whips in Bathurst are 66 feet or 1 Gunther's chain, but I'm going to do that separately. So here's, links will be in the description. It's all about town planning, the careful design, the symbolic sense, the more physical sense, the connections between the spiritual and the mundane, esoteric and exoteric, how they would connect to weights, measures and survey, because you have to measure the squares, and also, so often similar themes going on, and passed on through, whether it's the old Templars, more modern Masons, the craft guilds, back to the collegia in Rome, or to the mystery schools in ancient Egypt and these other ancient societies. We have the traditions are being passed on. So I'll put some links. All these links will be in the description. I hope you enjoyed, and have a good one. Happy 2019.